thanks to David Avella. You have a final thought for us?
Happy holidays to each of you. Look forward to being back.
Happy Friday.
I love that.
Friday.
All right, good stuff. Thanks to all of you. We will be back here at noon Eastern on Monday. And now, here's Harris.
We are waiting for any kind of pictures to come in. We don't know how long that will take, but there has been a large earthquake in Anchorage, Alaska. The USGS, Geological Society, is saying that they estimated it a 6.6 magnitude. And when it hit, at least one AP, Associated Press reporter, was where he or she could stand and see some cracks in buildings. We do know that lampposts and trees were swaying, prompting people to run out of their offices and seek shelter. Those who couldn't make it out of the office reportedly hiding underneath desks. The epicenter is said to have happened about 7 miles away from or north of Alaska's largest city. And again, 6.6 magnitude would be very large, and it has now triggered a secondary situation, and that is a tsunami warning along the southern coast of Alaska. As we get more information and possibly video, pictures to show you, we will bring them to you, as well as a live report. We're working on that as well for later in the hour, so stay tuned for that. And also this. Fox News alert, as President Trump has scored a big political win at the G20 summit, signing a revamped version of NAFTA. Remember, he's all about trade and getting those deals done as he can in Argentina, where that summit is happening. You're watching Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. We continue to follow developments at that summit in Buenos Aires. President Trump joining the leaders of Canada and Mexico to sign that new trade agreement today. The president says it will benefit American workers and revolutionize trade between our neighboring countries. Watch.
With our signatures today, we will formally declare the intention of our three countries to replace NAFTA with the USMCA, a truly groundbreaking achievement. The USMCA is the largest, most significant, modern, and balanced trade agreement in history. All of our countries will benefit greatly. It is probably the largest trade deal ever made also.
President Trump also met with the prime ministers of Japan and India. We showed you that on Outnumbered just a few minutes ago when it was happening. It's ahead of a high-stakes meeting with the Chinese president tomorrow, where they are expected to discuss trade. Kevin Court, live in Argentina, along with the president. Kevin?
European car manufacturers to China.
Harris, good afternoon. You're right. Trade continues to lead the agenda here at the G20. And while all eyes remain on that upcoming meeting on Saturday between the president and President Xi Jinping of China today, it was a bit of history for the president as well as the leaders of Japan and Canada. You and I were talking about the USMCA. The president, by the way, also today engaged his Japanese counterpart in a wide-ranging bilateral covering the massive trade gap between our countries and burgeoning U.S. military aircraft sales. But the big story, at least so far, is the USMCA. The president joined by his Mexican and Canadian counterparts in signing that trade deal that, as you pointed out, effectively replaces NAFTA.
We've worked hard on this agreement. It's been long and hard. We've taken a lot of barbs and a little abuse. And we got there. It's great for all of our countries. I look forward to working with members of Congress and the USMCA partners. And I have to say, it's been so well reviewed, I don't expect to have very much of a problem.
Also this morning, Vladimir Putin arrived here at the G20. As for the possibility of a sit-down between Presidents Trump and Putin, well, to be candid, that doesn't look so good at this moment.
We don't like what happened. We're not happy about it. Nobody is. And hopefully they'll be able to settle it out soon, because we look forward to meeting with President Putin. But on the basis of what took place with respect to the ships and the sailors, that was the sole reason.
Now, of course, the president talking about the interaction between the Russians and the Ukrainians out in the Sea of Azov. Meanwhile, there was the annual family photo, a tradition that, quite frankly, well, you can learn a lot from just a couple of minutes of interaction between the leaders. You may notice down the right side of your screen, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman seemed a little shunned to the corner. Very little interaction with him. The president was not standing next to the host country's president, instead sandwiched between President Macron and Prime Minister Abe. Very interesting. More meetings, of course, yet to come, as well as a cultural event tonight here, Harris. We're looking forward to that. We'll continue our coverage from here in beautiful Buenos Aires. But for now, back to you.
Kevin Corke, thank you very much. I'm now joined by Republican Congressman Chris Stewart of the House Intelligence Committee. Good to see you, sir. Let's talk about the G20. And the president's already had a trade agreement that he has signed. First, the significance of that. And now, secondarily, what does that tell China?
I think this is good news on several fronts. I mean, this has been a trademark policy of the president's that he's been pursuing. There were flaws in NAFTA that needed to be addressed, and he's successfully done this. Reluctantly by the Canadians, much more enthusiasm by the Mexicans, and I think this is going to be good for all three of us.
How is our relationship with Canada, with the whole world watching, and you see Justin Trudeau say that America's treating us like an enemy rather than an ally? Yeah, well, I think it's a vast overstatement. I'll bet if you could talk to him, he would regret that he said that. I mean, very clearly, we are a partner. We're a friend of theirs. Trade's incredibly important between the two of us. I'm afraid it's an unfortunate example of how sometimes our language maybe exceeds the reality. But they are a friend and a partner. And Harris, if I could talk about China that you mentioned, because I think that's really the key to this. I don't think many people doubted we weren't going to be able to successfully negotiate with our partners to the north and south of us. But China is something that if we're not willing to confront them, our children are going to pay an incredible price, and they're going to have to confront them at some point. And I know that the president considers trade one of the arrows in his quiver to bring China to the table on a global scale, not just about trade, but really about their ambitions globally over the next generation and our willingness to work with them, but at the same time not cede to them global leadership as they clearly desire. Sure, and I would imagine regionally too, because they would love to rule that region, the South China Sea and all that area. Absolutely. And yeah, okay. Can I just, though, speak about the realities of it? So the president signs this negotiated deal with Canada and Mexico. It has to go through all of you on Capitol Hill. What are some of the sticking areas? Do you think Congress will pass this USMCA? Yeah, I think so. And look, we need to look at it and look at the details, but I don't know of any real stumbling blocks. I haven't seen or heard rumblings of any real sticking points that would make it so Congress wasn't able to pass it. Well, some Democrats have said they might stand in the way, although I don't know how they could, since they say that they feel like big chunks of it are just like NAFTA. Yeah. Well, exactly. And I have to give President Obama credit, too, because he was willing to take on an issue which is generally a Republican issue, and that is free trade. And he did try to negotiate, agreements with some of our Asian partners and others. And he brought along some of his Republican or Democratic colleagues in thinking that, yeah, free trade really is beneficial to both of our nations. Let's go ahead and move forward on that. And I think that puts them in a different place than they would have been several years ago. All right. Before I let you go, I do want to touch on President Putin of Russia and just see where we are. Yeah. The president today very clearly said, look, my decision not to meet with him formally, which you can tell us how significant that is, was my decision alone. It's based on what's happening between or regard Russia to Ukraine. Yeah. Look, it was the right decision. And I promise you, Vladimir Putin wants this meeting far, far more than President Trump does. Well, because he wants to be a player on the world stage, and he has limited tools and limited access to do that. But Vladimir Putin is a KGB thug. And he's acting like a KGB thug. Crimea, Ukraine, as you've seen now, seizing Ukrainian vessels in the Sea of Azov, blocking waterways that are essential to their military and to their economic well-being. And he shows no reluctance or no remorse about this. And then he says, well, let's get together and talk, President Trump. And I think it was good for him to say, no, we're not going to do it under these circumstances. Congressman, I'm going to step in for a second. You and I often handle breaking news on this hour together. And here is some. That is the Prime Minister Morrison of Australia and the President of the United States. Let's watch.
Yeah. So I congratulate you, but it's an honor, and we will be with Australia and you all the way.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Australia and the United States has always been the greatest of friends. not just in areas of strategic cooperation, but economically and the people-to-people relationships, well, there's none better.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to be talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Guys, let's go. It's time to go. Let's go.
I don't know. Not particularly.
Let's go.
I don't know.
We're moving. Let's go. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Turn around here.
All right. Well, we cannot control the cameras there, obviously. I was trying to strain to hear what that question was. Mr. President, are you going to be meeting with... I'm going to ask my team, did you hear what the question was? And he said, not just yet. So if we can get a better beat on who he was asked about. But you see the Australian Prime Minister Morrison there and the president saying we are with Australia. We'll be talking more as the summit goes along. But we want to bring you these things as they happen. And it's sometimes hard to jump in and jump out. But it's definitely worth trying to get there at the G20 because we've already seen a lot this morning. I want to first of all thank Congressman Stewart of Utah for joining me off the top here. Thank him very much. And now we want to bring in a Democrat Congressman, Raj Krishnamurthy of the House Oversight Committee, going to get the flip side on some of the developments today. And I'm sorry for pausing, but I'm watching out of my kind of the corner of my monitor here to see if we need to go back. Great to see you, Congressman. So
great to see you, Harris.
You saw the president today sign, and I was just asking the congressman from Utah, Republican, whether the agreement, the USMCA, will get through Congress. Would there be any reason why Democrats would block that?
Well, first of all, I want to give him credit for going to the table and trying to improve. Give the president credit for going to the table, trying to improve NAFTA, which a lot of people on both sides of the aisle find is a flawed agreement. But there are some questions that kind of loom over the agreement, Harris. One is what happens to all the retaliatory tariffs directed at American exporters, including farmers? Secondly, there are some provisions that may increase prescription drug prices, something that's, again, a big concern for both Democrats and Republicans in this Congress. And then the third issue is there are some welcome steps on environmental and labor provisions. Now, what are the enforcement mechanisms for those? I think those are some of the questions that people have.
So what I hear you saying, though, those would not be a reason to reopen the text on this, because you know what happens when you start to renegotiate deals with other countries. It's harder and harder. Everybody gets farther and farther away from the table. So could these deals or could these issues then be handled in like side pages, because that's how you go forth? I don't hear anything that would stop you from keeping trade in place between Mexico and Canada. I just want to get a close point on this and we'll move forward.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely have to keep trade flowing between the three countries.
So this likely would pass what the president signed with some side pages on those three issues you just enumerated.
Possibly, but Harris, again, I haven't seen the text of the agreement. I think a lot of my colleagues are trying to keep an open mind on this, and I certainly am. I'd like to see more details.
Okay. You know, this is one of those meetings where or one of those instances where the president really can talk a lot of trade and tariff, and you bring that up. What do you think China is kind of contemplating after seeing that agreement get signed today? They're already feeling the punch to their economy that tariffs have levied against them.
Yeah, you know, thanks for bringing China up, because I think that's the other big issue that a lot of people are wondering aloud about, which is, you know, the Chinese are putting a lot of retaliatory tariffs, especially on our farmers, our soybean farmers, our pork farmers, and so forth. And so, as you know, this particular deal is not going to do anything about those, nor is it going to do anything about Mexico's tariffs on our pork producers and so forth. So the question going forward is, how is this going to translate into progress with regard to the Chinese, as well as dealing with those tariffs?
All right. Congressman, Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. We'll bring you back. And we've now got more breaking news, so let's bring this in. I promised to update you as we were getting things that have come in. And so let's just set this. We're still waiting for any video. We've got a live report coming up a little bit later this hour, an asset that we're trying to get into place there with a correspondent, not in Anchorage, obviously, but as nearby as we can. So a 6.6 magnitude earthquake hit about 7 miles outside, just north of Alaska's largest city. People were said to be running to take cover, some of them leaving buildings. At least one report of visual cracks in some buildings. This is a huge magnitude. There has already been at least one aftershock that has been reported as being rather large as well. We are on the story. Stay close. Breaking news, magnitude 6.6 earthquake, according to the USGS, has hit Anchorage, Alaska. And now a tsunami warning in effect. And we're getting some conflicting reports about how they are dealing with this right now in terms of that tsunami, because that warning was supposed to be on the southern coast. That may go away, and we will let you know forthwith if that happens. Let's go to Dan Springer, who is in Seattle, Washington. And Dan, we've already had a journey with how strong this was. Tell us about it.
Yeah, and we have it at 6.7 or 6.6. It's also been as high as 7 or 7.1. So that's not really unusual. Sometimes these things take a few minutes to ferret out. But I can tell you about the depth of this thing. I talked to the Pacific Northwest Seismic management folks in Seattle, and they have equipment that goes all the way up the coast there. And they said that this was so deep at 25 to 30 miles, but apparently it's more like 19 to 20 miles deep. But it's so deep that they didn't think it would trigger a tsunami warning. So, but as you said, one has been issued, but it's not the type of tsunami warning that they're too worried about down here in Seattle. We talked to some folks in a hotel, the Marriott there. We've stayed there many times. It's one of the taller buildings, one of the newer tall buildings in Alaska, about 12 stories high, and talked to a woman there, and she said they definitely felt it, but there was no damage at the hotel. I talked to some other folks who texted me a picture of Minnesota Drive, which is one of the main north-south roads that goes just south of downtown Anchorage, and it was pretty damaged. It was buckled, and you could see the pavement cracked. So definitely reports of some damage, but I couldn't get through to the emergency management folks. The phone is not being picked up there, so they're obviously being swamped by a lot of phone calls right now. But
all right, Dan, I'm going to cut in because we're getting some. Dan, I'm going to cut in because we're getting some new pictures. This is what we've been waiting for now. People inside their offices in Anchorage, Alaska. We've been told that the epicenter, which hit, was about 7 miles away from that highly populated city. That was very little video, but we wanted to show people. When you can, send me that picture that was texted to you so we can get it up. We can get a full screen made of it. Anchorage, Alaska, populated 298,000 nearly people at last count, census count in 2017. The Tsunami Warning Center has issued that for Cook Inlet, which is coastal areas of southern Alaska after the earthquake. And we don't want to overblow that. What they're expecting are large waves that would be coming in, tsunami-like. So we will fill people in on, and sometimes those will expire, right, Dan? And then I just want to talk with you too. You mentioned that area of that road. Tell me more.
Yeah, Minnesota Drive is probably a 6-lane road, and it's heavily traveled in Anchorage, and it has damage that I saw a car that was past the damage point, and there's no passing that road right now. So, again, we talked to the fire department. We tried to, and we're not getting through. But this Point McKenzie is just across Cook Inlet. In fact, we've done some stories on the bridge to nowhere. Well, one of those bridges to nowhere was supposed to cross over that area of the Cook Inlet to Point McKenzie. So it's a heavily populated area just north of Anchorage. But you mentioned about the tsunami warnings. That's interesting because they're talking about possible tsunami-like waves or smaller waves in the Cook Inlet. But those tsunami warnings have not been issued down further down the coast into Seattle. So again, I talked to the seismology folks in Seattle, and they say this was not on the subduction zone. This is not one of those quakes that they worry about, the big one happening out here. This was north of that subduction zone, and those tsunami warnings have not been triggered for the people down down south of Anchorage.
The U.S. Geological Survey, we were talking about what it first came in at, has reduced the number to 6.6. I'm going to bring in now a professor and expert on this. Dan Springer, stand by. We will come back to you as the news warrants. John Rundle, professor of physics and geology at the University of California, Davis, and director at the California Institute for Hazard Research of the University of California, joins me now by phone. Mr. Rundle, 6.6, what does that mean?
That's a pretty violent earthquake. The source dimension for that is probably on the order of something like 30, 40 kilometers, so about the same distance as it was deep. It was about 40 kilometers deep. And as you said earlier, it was pretty much right under Anchorage. The problem that one is going to see in Anchorage is similar to the Good Friday earthquake of 1964. The ground in that area, a lot of permafrost, very loose, very able to flow. There's a problem with liquefaction, and what that means is under violent shaking, the ground basically turns into a liquid and kind of flows. And essentially what you're seeing there in the street is that the effect of that. The roads are buckled and cracked, and it destroys foundations. If you remember the Christchurch earthquake, the magnitude 6.1, I think, earthquake in Christchurch in February 2011, that basically destroyed the city of Christchurch because it occurred right under the city, and much of the ground liquefied. There was much liquefaction going on there.
That's very interesting. I lived, and you mentioned the word permafrost. I lived up in Minnesota, and whenever we would go north, we would see areas that never thawed. Is that what you mean by that? That perma?
Yes, and unfortunately, because of global warming, the permafrost is starting to thaw. And in fact, not only do you get situations like this, but you're also getting a lot of methane produced. And that's, methane is a much more active global warming gas than carbon dioxide. It's about a factor of 4 or worse. So there's lots of problems associated with the thawing of permafrost.
You're talking about melting that has occurred. I have I've got an update here, and I'm glad you're on the phone with me. The Associated Press now has revised what it was being told and is now reporting a 7.0 earthquake.
Okay, so that's not too surprising. The initial reports are often low, and they go up with time.
Is that a much bigger, I mean, does 6.6 to 7.0, is that much of a jump in terms of damage or injuries that we might see?
That's a fairly large jump, so to speak. Essentially, you can expect something like a factor of, I'm going to just say offhand, a factor of 7 to 8 higher in energy release, in seismic wave amplitudes and so forth. So that's actually significant.
All right. So we do have some pictures that we've been showing people as they were in their office buildings in Anchorage. I mentioned that the epicenter was estimated 7 miles away, but what Professor Rundle is saying is that's almost underneath the city because of the permafrost situation, that liquefaction that goes on underneath the ground in that part of the world. So as we go back to those pictures, notice how they're reacting to this. This went on, according to what we can see, for a little bit, long enough for people to register, oh my goodness, and then find a place to jump under. That often speaks, and I lived in Northern California when the big one hit, the Nimitz Freeway, so on and so forth, and I remember the time and how long people had to move around and get under things. And sometimes that can create difficulties. You saw the one person on the stairs there. Professor, your thoughts?
So basically, when an earthquake is that close, there are two kinds of waves, a primary wave and a secondary wave. The primary wave often doesn't do the damage. It's really the secondary wave. And when it's that close, the difference between the two, as in Alaska, the difference in time between the two is only a second or two, whereas in California, in Loma Prieta, if you were in Oakland, you probably had something like 10 seconds to react to it. So when the first shaking starts, a lot of times seismologists start counting in seconds, and they can basically tell from that how, when the violent shaking starts, how far away the earthquake was. It's a topic called dispersion, basically, dispersion of seismic waves.
We are going to continue to cover this. I know you mentioned some weather elements there, and there's a lot of disagreement on how we get to different places scientifically, but I want to make it very clear, an earthquake is not meteorological, it's geological, and what you're saying is that sometimes things like water can have an effect in an earthquake because of where this is located. Professor Rundle, thank you.
Sure.
We will be right back as we continue to cover this breaking news. Revised now to a 7.0 magnitude earthquake hitting Alaska's largest city. Nearly 298,000 people live in that city. The magnitude just jumped from a 6.6 to a 7. Finding out more about what that means, reports of cracked buildings, buckled streets. Are there any injuries? We're not getting any reports this early. We're covering it. It has been about 47 minutes since a major earthquake hit Anchorage, Alaska. It has been revised up now from a 6.6 magnitude by the USGS to now a magnitude 7.0 earthquake. The epicenter, we are told, was about 7 miles outside Anchorage, but from one of the experts that we're talking to this hour about this, that's pretty much under the city of Anchorage as he looks at it. I want to bring back Dan Springer in the Pacific Northwest in our Seattle bureau. You're forwarding a picture to us of buckled roads, and we're starting to hear some pretty scary stories from people who are stuck inside places or choosing to be inside places. Dan?
Yeah, the picture that I saw was actually sent to me by a contact that I have up there with Lisa Murkowski, Senator Murkowski's office, and it was actually tweeted by somebody who was trying to pass on Minnesota Drive, which is just south of downtown Anchorage, and it's a major road. It's about a 4-lane road that goes through Anchorage, and it was buckled. It was you could see a car on the other side of that pavement, but it's completely torn up. And again, that was an impassable road now. I've also spoken with people at a hotel, the Marriott there, who say that it shook. They definitely felt it all at 8:30 this morning, but that there was no damage at that hotel. Clearly, there's going to be differing reports of damage throughout the city with this major earthquake at 7.0. The tsunami report is for Cook Inlet only. The tsunami warning was not triggered for, that widespread warning that we see often.
Right. Can I jump in there 1 second?
Coast.
Because you're absolutely right about that. It was not a widespread warning. But police now in Alaska's Kodiak Island community are telling people to head to higher ground amid tsunami threat from the earthquake. So you're right, that actual official warning didn't go out. But Alaska's Kodiak Island community being told by police, get to higher ground.
And it's the depth of the earthquake that really kind of determines whether or not the tsunami danger is severe or not. And initially, my folks in Seattle who were monitoring this say it was a depth of 25 to 30 miles. And then now they've revised that to more like 19 miles deep. So it is a relatively deep earthquake, and that's why we're not seeing tsunami warnings triggered further down from Alaska.
So, it's interesting because when you and I first started reporting this just a few minutes ago, and it's been now about 49 minutes since this thing hit, with the time difference there, local time 9:34 in the morning in Anchorage, Alaska. When we first started talking, this was a 6.6. And you say that your connections, your resources said it was much deeper. Now it's a bit shallower, although 20 miles is still deep. It's a bit shallower, and it's much more powerful.
Yeah, and that's what happens with earthquakes. The initial readings aren't always correct, and as you heard from that expert, they often go up over time. So that's what we're seeing with this earthquake. I can tell you that there have been reports of all planes being stopped from landing at Anchorage Airport, the Ted Stevens Airport there in Anchorage, but then there were secondary reports that some planes are being to land there. The local TV station is having all their personnel outside of the building, and they are trying to broadcast with their cell phones.
Oh, wow.
They say it's too dangerous to be inside the KTUU building there. So, it's definitely shaking the people of Anchorage, and we're going to try to get more information on what's happening on the ground there, but all the emergency management folks aren't picking up their lines, and the police department, fire departments are scrambling right now to respond to all the calls that they're getting.
Yeah, I'm seeing if in their social media there's anything from the Ted Stevens Airport there. I'm on their website. I'm checking to see our team can possibly give their airport manager, Jim Cesniak, a call. That's right on the front page of the Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. We can do our own reporting and figure out whether or not that airport is in a ground stop or anything more or less than that. 9:20 in the morning, so about 10 minutes ago local, people started giving their reports of what happened. There's one attorney in Anchorage who said he grabbed onto the door frame in the hallway of his office, and the door slammed on his hands, scraping his fingers in one hand. And he said that's what he knew to do, grab onto that door frame, but this thing was so powerful it sent things swinging. Cap says this is his last name, the lawyer here, and this is being relayed by the Associated Press. This attorney, Justin Cap, says it's the worst he's seen in the 8 years he's lived in Anchorage. I know you're getting some reports. You mentioned that employee of Senator Lisa Murkowski's office. What else did you learn?
Well, just that nerves are rattled up there, obviously. One thing I can tell you is that the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, again, the major operation here that monitors all the faults, says that this happened north of the subduction zone. A lot of people back east read the New Yorker article on the big one that's going to happen on the subduction zone. We don't know exactly which fault this was on, but we know that it was not on the subduction zone, which is the tectonic plates that go from the west coast out into the Pacific Ocean, and underneath that plate is that subduction zone. So apparently did not happen on that. So this is not the big one, and it's not even the biggest one in Alaska. Remember, we had that 9.1 back in, I think it was 1964, that was just decimated. Yes. Alaska. So this is not the same type of earthquake. This is much smaller by a large degree. But again, it's much more populated up there. You have a lot of growth. 280,000 people live in Anchorage, and yes, because this happened so close to Anchorage, everybody there obviously felt it. It was just across the Cook Inlet at a place called Point McKenzie. Underneath there, about 20 miles is where it was centered.
All right, so lots of people up there compared to what it would have been even back in 1964. The latest census putting it close to what you said, about 297 plus, almost 298,000 people. Dan, you've given me some great things to talk with an expert about. I'm going to again ask you to stand pat, scoop up more information through your reporting, and we'll come back as the news warrants. I want to bring in John Bellini, a geophysicist with the U.S. Geological Survey. Those are the people giving us the magnitude information. You're with me by phone right now. What can you tell me?
Just north of Anchorage, Alaska, there's been a magnitude 7.0 earthquake just a little over an hour ago. It was felt obviously very strongly in the area. There have been several aftershocks recorded so far, the largest, which has been a magnitude 5.7.
All right. And that's a lot of the information that we know already. Why does it get revised like that? What is an indication that, yeah, this was bigger than a 6.6?
Well, when the data first comes in, you try to get out the quickest, most accurate location and magnitude as soon as possible. But as more of the data gets in, especially for these larger earthquakes, the magnitude can sometimes go up, and that's what we see here today with our magnitude 7.0.
From what you know, is that consistent with the reports that we're getting about cracks in buildings, buckled roads, and people having to jump under objects, that this went on long enough for them to make those types of decisions?
Yeah, that's definitely a typical pattern of shaking and damage that we see with an earthquake of this size in this region of the world.
How does this compare just in terms of what's happening with the water? Because they didn't send out a widespread tsunami warning. According to our reporter Dan Springer, it hit just Cook's Inlet. But now we're learning that police in Alaska's Kodiak Island community are telling people to head to higher ground because of the tsunami threat with the earthquake.
For a magnitude 7.0, this is actually fairly typical as well. You generally don't see very huge tsunamis, but you can see a tsunami that can cause some damage, and it definitely is necessary for people to get to higher ground or to the high floors of a multi-story building, if possible, if there has been a tsunami warning.
Mr. Bellini, what can you tell me about the structural building codes and things in that part of the country? What can they withstand? Because if you're already hearing about cracks, and it sounds like you're not all that impressed with the 7.0 because of where this happened, talk to me about how prepared the structures are.
Well, Anchorage and Alaska in general is a very seismically active region, and they do get lots of large and earthquakes that cells and can cause damage. So the building structures in that region are fairly well prepared to weather an earthquake of this size.
Okay. And the people themselves, I mean, we see people diving under things. We're hearing one report that I shared with viewers via the Associated Press where a man was trying, we were all told, I lived in Northern California, we're all told to get in that doorway. Sometimes what they forget to tell you is don't put your hands on the sides because the doors start swinging. And what does that tell you about the force of this particular quake?
Well, that does tell me that it was a strong, fairly major earthquake, and sounds like people are doing the right things trying to protect themselves. And in the days and weeks to come, there's also the possibility of large aftershocks, so they should be prepared for them as well.
Okay. Anything in particular that you would say about the aftershock situation based on the heavy activity of earthquakes in that region that you're telling us about?
Because this earthquake is so large, magnitude 7.0, we would expect to see frequent aftershocks, on and off throughout the next few days, and that number will taper off in size and magnitude over the weeks and months to come. But they will feel numerous aftershocks in the next few days.
All right. Mr. Bellini with the USGS, and those are the people who are watching the magnitude of all of this. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I want to tell everybody the pictures that you have been seeing are of people inside their offices and places where they were making decisions while this is going on. There are some details that I'm looking to learn, and that is how long this earthquake lasted. And how far away from the epicenter there is damage. Those will tell us a lot, those details. We'll have much more on this breaking news story. I'll talk with one man who rode out the quake in Anchorage. We're getting him on the phone right now. Stay close. We continue to watch the situation and hopefully get more pictures to show you, and any reporting that we can bring you for how long this earthquake happened in Anchorage, Alaska, we will bring it to you immediately. That's important information because it was a magnitude 7.0. That is a large earthquake. We were talking moments ago. I was with an expert with the USGS, Mr. Bellini, and he seemed very calm. And that is actually an interesting development because he has seen this so much. There's so much geological activity that goes on in that part of the world. But the reality is we are now learning from police in Alaska's Kodiak Island community, which is, by the way, 200 miles south of Anchorage. So some 200 miles south of what would have been the nearby epicenter of this. We are hearing that they need to get to higher ground because of a threat of tsunami waves from the earthquake. Buildings rocked, trees swaying, damage to roads, some heavy damage. We heard from our reporter, Dan Springer, who was talking with the Senator Lisa Murkowski's staff, and we're hoping to get a picture. They took pictures of that one road, that Minnesota road he talked about that was 6 lanes wide. Think about that, how big that would be. Buckling and having major damage. Office workers running into the streets from their offices. And we've already been showing you interior video that was captured of people diving under desks and people saying they were trying to get to doorways. But now we know what it was like because we're going to bring in Ben English, who rode out the quake near Anchorage. He was actually on the 10th floor of the building. Ben, you're with me by phone?
Yes, I am.
All right. And I understand you told my team here that made it worse because you were so high up. Talk to me about writing this out.
Yeah, when the higher you are, the more you sway, so the shaking is magnified. So, the top of the building sways more than the ground does. So it was pretty extreme. Basically, the duration seemed to be pretty long. I would guess, over a minute at least of continual shaking. And there's been some pretty major aftershocks afterwards.
Was this a business, a commercial building, or was this your home?
Nope, this is the Frontier building between A and C Street on 36. So I was on the 10th floor. I am home now. I got home. I'm close to work, but a lot of people are really stuck on the roads. There's infrastructure problems, and everybody's trying to get out at once. And the schools actually texted out to all the parents to come pick up their kids. So there's just a major gridlock right now.
Wow. These are helpful details as we try to understand. The last guest that I had from the USGS was very calm about this. He did say that there would be a lot of damage because 7.0 is big, but that you live through this activity all the time. Have you ever felt anything like this?
Well, I experienced when I first moved up here from New York, I felt a 7.6 in 2002, but that was, a couple hundred miles away, so it was much, much, much less intense than this one was, even though this was a 7.0. And I would assume that's because of the location and how close it was to Anchorage itself.
Right, 7 miles outside. Cook's Inlet got that first tsunami warning. Other places didn't necessarily get that official warning, but we know as far away as the Kodiak Island community, they're being told to seek higher ground. That is a big show of force from nature.
Full service, relax in at Auto Spa.
The zip code you're born into can determine your future. Your school, your job, your dreams, your problems. But at the Y, we create opportunities for everyone, no matter who you are or where you're from. For a better us, support your local Y today.
Now from local television there, KTVA, that people are being told to shelter in place. And now first pictures, fresh pictures coming in from the damage from a 7.0 magnitude earthquake that has hit Alaska's largest city. Some 298,000 people in this area. The magnitude, again, 7.0, was upgraded from a 6.6 not long ago. Initially, they had said 7.0. The USGS revised down, and now it has revised back up. It's also a shallower earthquake than we had first been told, putting it at about 19 to 20 miles. Let's bring in my guest, John English, real quickly. We are seeing some pretty interesting damage, reports of a lot of damage outside. They want people to shelter in place. Ben?
Yes. Yeah, there's. I'm receiving pictures from friends and stuff. There's roads that are completely buckled and torn up, and apparently overpasses have collapsed, or at least partially, and there's definitely infrastructure damage around town.
We are trying to get good information on whether or not the Ted Stevens International Airport has shut down. We had told that there was a ground stop at first. We have our team working on that right now as well. I know that you said in 2002 you experienced a 7.6. You said this is worse. Ben English, we are glad that you are safe. Thank you for joining me. We'll be right back.
We saved hundreds on our car insurance when we switched to Geico. This is how it made me feel. It was like that feeling when you're mowing the lawn on a sunny day, and without even trying, you end up with one last strip that's exactly the width of your mower. When you're done, it looks so good you post a picture on social media. And it gets 127 likes.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
I want the American people to see what devastation illegal aliens cause. Edwin Mejia is the illegal alien that killed my daughter. My separation is permanent. I want to see that wall built. I want to see stronger immigration laws. Make your voice heard. Call your congressmen, your senators. I do not want what happened to our family to happen to another person.
Beltone, a global leader in hearing care, is introducing a new innovative hearing technology. To find out if you're a candidate, schedule an appointment to have your hearing evaluated. If you qualify, you will be asked to try the remarkable new Beltone Amaze. This small device delivers unparalleled sound quality. It is virtually invisible and comfortable. Call 1-800-BELTONE now to hear sounds, words, and conversation more clearly. And stream music and phone calls directly to your hearing aids from your favorite electronic devices. Call 1-800-BELTONE today.
George woke up in pain, but he has plans today, so he took a leave this morning.
Hey, Dad.
If he'd taken Tylenol, he'd be stopping for more pills right now. Only Aleve has the strength to stop tough pain for up to 12 hours with just one pill. Tylenol can't do that. Aleve, All day strong, all day long. Now introducing Aleve Back and Muscle Pain for up to 12 hours of pain relief with just one pill.
Call 1-800-SANDALS.
Never before has it been more important to protect your assets, IRAs, and 401ks from the financial crisis that we're facing. Hi, I'm William Devane, and like you, I've worked hard for my money, and I'm not about to lose it now. With all the financial craziness in the world, I protect my retirement by buying gold every chance I get. I buy my gold from Rosalind Capital because I trust them. No sales gimmicks there. Rosalind will beat any price of any coin at any time. Just call them. And Rosalind will send you free information on how you can protect your assets and your retirement. So protect your future from the problems of the world. Invest in stability with Rosalind Capital.
Call now for your free gold, silver, and IRA transfer kits. And for a limited time, Rosalind is offering a $1,000 discount free